Today in the smuggler's room, I'm making a foam, paper towel, and Mod Podge sandwich. This isn't no BLT. I'm calling this an MFP, a Millennium Falcon pad sandwich. It's just the kind of diet I'm on. That's coming up. What's up, you awesome geeks? I'm Brian and welcome to the Smuggler's Room. This week, this chubby geek is going to make some actual progress on the Smuggler's Room build. But before we do that, if it's your first time with us, think about subscribing and hit the bell so that you don't miss a single geektastic moment. Alright, so this is part one of what we're calling the south wall, or the poster wall. You can see here in this animation that it's the section of the room that has our Star Wars A New Hope poster displayed on it. But before we could actually work on it, we needed to assemble the wall in our shop in a mock-up scenario. Once this was all set up, we were able to go in and measure all the different sections of the wall so that we could put our poster exactly where we wanted it to be. Knowing where this poster of awesomeness is going to live allows us to determine exactly how big and how many pads we can have on this wall. Raise your hand if you don't know what the heck we're talking about when I say pads. Alright. Good enough. Let me explain. These pads that we're talking about are seen all through the Millennium Falcon's interior. In my opinion, they're iconic and instantly recognizable for that ship. You can see them bordering all the different entranceways, as well as all the corridors inside the Falcon. Now, for our ship, we wanted it to be instantly recognizable as well as being a YT 1300 model freighter. Not familiar with what a YT 1300 model is? That's okay, we'll get to that in a future episode, I promise. So for the pads we're going to create, we're going to use 2-inch thick insulation foam. The great part about this material is it cuts super easy on the table saw, or you could use a handsaw or even a razor knife would get the job done. It also sands easily, which you're going to see more of in a moment. Once we cut all the pads out, we do a quick test fit against the wall. This allows us to see kind of where we are and what we have. Now, all the pads in the Falcon are rounded over, and so they will be in our ship. In order to do that, we bought a 1-inch roundover bit and installed that into the router. And then we could run all the foam cut pads down the edge of the router. This gets us about 80% of the way there to achieving the look we're after. So to get 100% of the way there, the rest of it has to be done by sanding and shaping until we get all that roundover exactly where we want it. Okay geeks, pro tip and serious safety concern. When you're working with hazardous materials or you're working with something like foam and breathing that in can get straight into your lungs. So don't be an idiot like this chubby geek and make sure you're wearing a respirator or some type of facial protection when you're working on your projects and stay safe. Now I wanted these foam pads to have some damaged areas, so we busted out the rotary tool and used a whole bunch of different bits to carve in these scratches and marks within the pads. I'll tell you that this worked really well, but I overdid it, and it wasn't the first mistake on these pads that I made, but we'll get to that in a sec. Okay, let's talk about foam and Mod Podge. And who was I to think that this little container of Mod Podge was going to be enough? Silly geek, you need a lot of Mod Podge for this project. In order to protect the phone and prepare it for paint, we have to apply a good coat, 2 layers to be precise, of Mod Podge over the foam. This stuff is great because it's not toxic and it's easy to apply. I just used a disposable brush and evenly coated all of my foam pieces twice. I also used the paintbrush and the Mod Podge to try to add some texture. Now this also failed, but don't worry, we're getting to my mistakes on this project soon enough. Now once your Mod Podge is completely cured, you can start applying the paint. I had Home Depot mix me up a gallon of latex paint in an off-white color. This allowed me to use my critter gun to evenly spray across all the pads. Thanks, Punish Props. The critter gun hooks up to my air compressor and does an awesome job of spraying even coats all over the pads without any brush strokes. And now the weathering. And this is where things really start to fall apart on me here. So yeah, I mixed some acrylic paints and I made a nice mud mixture. And then I started to apply it. Have you noticed my mistake yet? If you said that he was scrubbing from left to right in a really consistent pattern, then you nailed it. So why does that matter? Well, it doesn't if I was going to make this look like wood. But I'm not going for wood, dang it, this is the Millennium Falcon. I'm not trying to build the Pirates of Caribbean ship room here. All right, I'll calm down. The bottom line here is, I wasn't going for a wood look. And I didn't listen to my friend Greg. You remember Greg from the What a Piece of Junk YouTube channel? Yeah, Greg is the guy that pioneered the technique that we're about to see for creating these iconic pads, because he built a full-scale Millennium Falcon cockpit. And I didn't listen. So how do we come to the correct look? Shop towels. You heard me, shop towels. The blue kind seem to work the best for me. Yep, you need to tear sheets of shop towels. And then, and this is the really tedious part, you have to tear away all the straight edges on all four sides of every towel. You don't want any of the towels to have anything but a jagged edge. And yeah, you're gonna need a lot of them. So then you go back to your ugly failed pad and you add more Mod Podge, and then you start laying in the towels. Each one of these gets carefully laid on top of another, making sure that those edges are a little bit overlapping, as well as adding Mod Podge to the top. This creates a bond and it glues them all together. And it also makes the texture of the towels pop out, which is actually what we're looking for. Beyond the texture, you can actually go in and pinch to add extra wrinkles and cracks. And also, remember those big gouges we made with the rotary tool? You can actually stuff the paper towel down into those cracks and add more of the Mod Podge. Now, once you work this for a bit, you're gonna end up with a great texture. But be warned, you can overdo this technique, and I did. I ended up making an entire set additionally to these pads because I had way too much going on. Less is more often than I would like to admit. Let's talk about weathering again. And yes, I went through and repainted the pads with that same off cream color the same way I did before. This time, however, I mixed the paint the same way, but added more water. And then instead of trying to use the brush for everything, I did the pat towel technique that I might have to rename the D-trick. Thanks, Greg. With the cheap brush, I used it to apply the paint, but then I used the towel to dab it away consistently. This pulls up most of the paint from the surface, but leaves it in the cracks. And I also kept a spray bottle on hand so I could water it down in places that I needed to remove more of the paint. And as the towels got dirty, I didn't throw them away. I kept using a variety of them. The more grime and filth, the better. It added another layer of texture to the pads. I should add that there's a step here that I didn't show you. Before we added the weathering, I sprayed everything down with a clear coat. This served a couple of purposes. One, it protected the bottom layer of latex paint from coming apart with all the water. And two, it added another layer of rigidity to the entire pad. There's going to be a lot of people and kids interacting in this space, and I don't want any damage if I can help it. I also went back and applied the same clear coat after we did the weathering, and that will protect our weathering finish. Okay, so let's go ahead and install part of this thing. I went ahead and painted a large section of the wall without you. I'm sure you'll forgive me for that. And then we went ahead and laid out our first pad. Now, to get this to sit where I wanted, I cut a couple of blocks of plywood and put them at the base the right distance and clamp them down. This will give me a secure place to set the pad against. After that, I went ahead and started applying contact cement. You need to use the contact cement on both the wall and the pad. Now, here's a critical error that I almost made the mistake. You need to make sure you seal the back of the foam. In my case, I just did 2 layers more of Mod Podge on the back and let it fully cure. The reason is, if you apply that contact cement directly on the foam, it's just gonna chew right through it, and then you won't have a flat surface to glue against. So, once both sides are tacky, you could go ahead and put them together, put your pad in place. But keep in mind, you've only got one shot at this really. There's not a lot of time to reposition. The contact cement makes almost an instant bond. I didn't want these pads to butt right up against each other. So I used wire loom between each pad, and that gave me some tubing and that kind of textured look. It just so happens that the wire loom I used is exactly the right length for what I needed. Wow, that never happens to me. I then added 1 greebly on the base pad because I could not help myself. But in order to do this, I actually drilled out 4 of the holes. Yes, I drilled into the foam. The reason was I was able to stream in a little CA glue into each hole, as well as a little CA glue on each of the hex head bolts that I used to fasten the whole thing down. Surprisingly enough, this held incredibly well. I don't know if it'll stand the test of time, but right now it's a super tight bond. After that step, it's just all about adding another pad and another set of the wire loom and then another pad after that. Alright geeks, I'm getting kind of excited that there's some things starting to happen, and I think we're off to a pretty decent start on this series. Now, in the meantime, run out there, grab yourself some foam, get some Mod Podge, and maybe a few paper towels, and start building your own something out of nothing. This is me finding the focus in the camera. I found it! Actual progress on the Smuggler's Room build. Hello. In my opinion, they're iconic and instantly recognizable. So you're saying to yourself, why does it matter? Well, that sucks.